Welcome, dear listener. As you settle into your comfortable space, allow your body to sink gently into the softness beneath you. Feel the weight of the day gradually lifting from your shoulders with each slow, deep breath. In and out, in and out. Let your breathing find its natural rhythm as we journey together through this story. There's nothing you need to do now except listen and relax. Let my voice be a gentle companion as you drift toward peaceful sleep. Asterisk the evening light spilled like honey across the wooden floorboards of the small cottage that perched on the edge of the world. Clara stood by the window, her fingers lightly tracing patterns in the condensation that had formed on the glass. Outside, the sea stretched endlessly toward the horizon, a canvas of deepening blues and purples as the sun made its unhurried descent. The lighthouse stood tall and steadfast on the rocky outcrop beyond her gardener, silent guardian that had watched over this coastline for more than a century. Its white stone walls glowed amber in the fading light, a warm beacon against the cooling sky. Clara's father had tended that light for 30 years before her, and now it was her responsibility, her inheritance, her quiet purpose. She wrapped her cardigan more snugly around her shoulders, feeling the soft, well-worn wool against her skin. The evening air carried the first whispers of autumn, not quite cold, but bearing the promise of change, of seasons turning their gentle wheel. Clara breathed deeply, drawing in the mingled scents of salt and wild heather that drifted through the slightly open window. Her cottage was small, but filled with treasures that spoke of a life richly lived. Shelves lined with books whose pages had been turned by firelight on countless winter evenings, sea glass in shades of cobalt and emerald, arranged in mason jars that caught the light, a collection of shells, each one gathered during morning walks along the shore, each one holding memories of days when the tide had revealed its secrets. The kettle on the stove began to sing softly, its gentle whistle rising like a lullaby. Clara moved unhurriedly across the room, her footsteps making the floorboards creak in a familiar rhythm that had become part of the cottage's voice. She poured the steaming water over a blend of chamomile and lavender, watching as tendrils of steam rose and curled in the golden evening light, dancing like spirits before dissolving into the air. With her tea cradled between her palms, Clara settled into the old armchair by the window. Its cushions embraced her with the memory of their shape, worn to fit her perfectly through years of quiet evenings just like this one. From here, she could see both the lighthouse and the village that nestled in the curve of the bay below. Lights were beginning to appear in windows, small constellations of warmth against the gathering dusk. The village of Tidewater Bay was as much a part of Clara as her own heartbeat. She knew every cobblestone street, every weathered fishing boat that bobbed in the harbor, every family whose stories were interwoven with her own. Though she lived apart on this quiet headland with only the seabirds and Lighthouse for company, she never felt truly alone. The rhythm of the village life below, the steady presence of the sea, and the constancy of the light she tended, these were her companions as twilight deepened into evening. Clara finished her tea and prepared for her nightly ritual. She slipped her feet into worn leather boots, wrapped a woolen scarf around her neck, and took the brass key from its hook by the door. The path to the lighthouse was one she could walk with her eyes closed. Indeed, she had done so on nights when fog had rolled in so thick that the world beyond arm's reach disappeared entirely. Tonight, however, the sky was clear, a canvas of deepening indigo where the first stars had begun to appear. The air was still, holding its breath between day and night. Clara's footsteps crunched softly on the gravel path, a gentle percussion accompanying the distant rhythm of waves against the shore below. Gulls called to one another as they settled for the night, their voices carrying across the water like forgotten lullabies. The lighthouse door opened with a familiar creak, welcoming her into its circular embrace. Inside, the space was cool and smelled of stone, brass, and the faint mineral scent of the sea. Clara began her ascent, her hand gliding along the smooth stone wall as she climbed the spiral staircase. 137 steps, she had counted them as a child, holding her father's hand, and the number had become a kind of prayer, a meditation that carried her upward toward the light dot at the top. The lantern room awaited, its glass panes offering a view in every direction, land and village to one side, endless ocean to the other, and above, a sky now transformed into a tapestry of stars. Clara moved through her duties with practiced grace, checking mechanisms, polishing brass, ensuring that when darkness fully claimed the world, the light would shine with unwavering clarity, guiding ships safely past the treacherous rocks that lurked beneath the water's surface. As she worked, Clara hummed softly, an old folk song her father had taught her about a sailor finding his way home by following the stars. The melody drifted around the circular room, mingling with the rhythmic clicking of the lighthouse machinery and the distant murmur of the sea below. These sounds formed the soundtrack of her life, as familiar and necessary as her own heartbeat. With the light now burning strong and true, Clara settled onto the small bench that curved along the wall of the lantern room. From here, she could watch both the sea and the sky, bearing witness to the night's slow unfolding. This was her favorite time, this quiet communion with the elements, this peaceful solitude laying a silver path across the water. Clara watched as it climbed higher, casting gentle shadows across the landscape and transforming the ordinary into something magical. The village below had grown quiet, most windows now dark as people settled into dreams. Only the lighthouse remained vigilant, its beams sweeping across the water in steady rotation, a heartbeat of light in the darkness. As she sat in this peaceful vigil, Clara's thoughts drifted to the letter that had arrived that morning. Eleanor, her childhood friend, who had left Tidewater Bay 20 years ago to seek adventure in distant cities. Eleanor, whose letters had grown less frequent as time passed and their lives diverged along different paths. Now, unexpectedly, she had written to say she was returning, not just to visit, but to stay. The news had settled in Clara's heart like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples of emotion, outward joy, curiosity, and a quiet apprehension. How would it feel to have Eleanor back in Tidewater Bay after all this time? Would they still recognize the friendship they had once shared, or had time transformed them both into strangers? Clara had remained while Eleanor had wandered. What stories would they now have to exchange? These questions floated gently through her mind, not demanding immediate answers, but simply making themselves known, like the first stars appearing in the evening sky. Clara let them be, neither grasping nor dismissing them. Tomorrow would arrive with its own rhythm, its own revelations. For now, there was only this moment, the moon, the stars, the steady beam of light reaching out across the water, and her own quiet presence at the center of it all. When the clock in the mechanism room chimed midnight, Clara rose from her bench. She checked the light one final time, ensuring all was in perfect order, then began her descent down the spiral staircase. Her footsteps echoed softly against the stone walls, counting backward from 137 as she returned to earth. Outside, the night had deepened, the darkness velvety and rich. The temperature had dropped, and Clara's breath formed small clouds that dissipated into the stillness. The path back to her cottage was illuminated by moonlight, casting long, soft shadows across the ground. She walked unhurriedly, savoring the quiet magic of this in-between time when the world seemed to belong only to her and the night creatures. Clara lit a small lamp, its warm glow creating a pool of light that held the darkness at bay. Changing into her nightdress and brushing her hair with long, gentle strokes that released the scent of lavender from its waves. Finally, she slipped between cool sheets that quickly warmed to her body's temperature. From her bed, she could see through the window to where the lighthouse beams swept steadily across the night sky, a rhythm as constant as her own heartbeat, as reassuring as an old friend's voice. Clara watched it until her eyelids grew heavy, until the boundary between wakefulness and dreams began to blur, until sleep gathered her gently into its arms and carried her away on tides of memory and imagination. Morning arrived with gentle insistence, sunlight filtering through curtains that danced in the soft breeze. Clara opened her eyes to a room bathed in golden light, dust motes floating like tiny stars in the sunbeams. Listening to the day's first offerings, the distant call of gulls, the whisper of waves against the shore, the rustle of leaves in the garden as the wind moved through them with delicate fingers. The knowledge that Eleanor would arrive today rose slowly into her consciousness, like the tide coming in gradual, inevitable, transforming the landscape of her thoughts. Clara allowed herself to linger in bed a few moments longer, gathering her feelings like shells along a shoreline, examining each one with careful attention before placing it gently back into the waters of her mind. When she finally rose, it was with purpose, but without hurry. The wooden floor was cool beneath her bare feet as she moved to the window and drew back the curtains completely. The world outside was washed in the clear light of early autumn, the sea, a deep, vibrant blue, the grass on the headland still green, but touched here and there with gold, as if an artist had begun to paint the coming season with delicate brushstrokes. Clara, dressed in layers of soft fabrica cotton blouse, the color of cream, a cardigan, the shade of heather, comfortable trousers that had faded to the color of driftwood. Her movements were unhurried as she prepared a simple breakfast oatmeal with honey and cinnamon, a pot of Earl Grey tea that filled the cottage with its bergamot fragrance. She ate by the window, watching as the village below gradually awakened. Fishing boats setting out from the harbor, smoke rising from chimneys in lazy spirals. After breakfast, Clara found herself drawn to preparations she hadn't planned. She gathered wildflowers from the garden, late-blooming cosmos in shades of pink and white, sprigs of lavender, tall grasses that added texture and movement. These she arranged in a blue glass vase that had belonged to her grandmother, placing it on the small table by the guest room window where Eleanor would sleep. She opened windows to let the sea breeze move through the rooms, carrying away the stillness and bringing in the scent of salt and wild herbs. She dusted shelves that didn't need dusting, straightened books that were already aligned, smoothed bed covers that were without wrinkles, a rhythm of movement and purpose that calmed the unexpected flutter of nerves in her chest. By midday, the cottage was filled with light and readiness. Clara made a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples, eating at the kitchen table while rereading Eleanor's letter. The handwriting was both familiar and strange, recognizable in its basic shape, but altered by the years. More confident, perhaps, more defined, like Eleanor herself might be. I'm coming home, Clara. After all this time, I'm finally coming home. The city has given me everything I thought I wanted, but lately I've been dreaming of the sea, of the lighthouse on the headland, of the quiet we used to take for granted. I wonder if you'll recognize me. I wonder if Tidewater Bay will still recognize me. I'll arrive on the afternoon bus on the 15th. Will you meet me? Or shall I find my way to you, following the lighthouse beam like we did as children, pretending we were ships seeking safe harbor? Clara folded the letter carefully along its creases and returned it to its envelope. The 15th today had arrived with surprising swiftness. The bus would reach Tidewater Bay at 3 o'clock, giving her just enough time to walk down to the village if she left soon. She cleared away her lunch dishes, washed them with methodical care, and then stood for a moment in the center of her kitchen, taking a deep breath as if preparing to dive into deep water. The path from the lighthouse cottage to the village wound its way down the headland, like a ribbon unfurling. Clara walked at an unhurried pace, her footsteps finding the familiar contours of earth and stone. Wild grasses brushed against her legs, releasing their subtle fragrance. Butterflies, perhaps the last of the season, danced on currents of air. The sounds of the village rose to meet Hertha, distant laughter of children playing near the shore, the clatter of work from the boatyard, the melodic call of a street vendor selling fresh fish. These sounds had formed the backdrop of her childhood, as constant and changing as the sea itself. She wondered if Eleanor would find them as familiar, or if 20 years in the city had retuned her ears to a different symphony. The village square was dappled with sunlight, filtering through the leaves of ancient oak trees. Clara found a bench near the bus stop and settled herself to wait. From here, she could see most of Tidewater bathe the curved harbor with its fishing boats and small pleasure craft, the row of shops with their colorful awnings, the stone church whose bell tower had guided generations of villagers through celebrations and sorrows. Time seemed to move differently here than it did at the lighthouse, more socially, perhaps, marked by human rhythms rather than the eternal patterns of light and tide. At precisely 3 o'clock, the bus appeared at the far end of the main street, moving unhurriedly through the village like a visitor who knows they are welcome to linger. Clara watched its approach with a strange calmness that surprised her. The flutter of nerves had subsided, replaced by a quiet certainty. Whatever changes time had wrought, whatever differences might now exist between them, the essential connection she had shared with Eleanor remained, like the deep currents that flow beneath the changing surface of the sea. The bus wheezed to a stop, its doors opening with a hydraulic sigh. A few passengers disembarked, young couple with backpacks who were clearly tourists, an elderly man who was greeted warmly by a waiting friend, a woman with a small child who hurried toward one of the village shops. And then, finally, Eleanor. She stepped down from the bus with a grace that seemed both new and familiar. Her hair, once long and often tangled by the sea wind, was now cut short, framing a face that had matured into its beauty. She wore simple clothes in shades of blue and gray city clothes, but not ostentatiously so. She carried a single suitcase and a canvas bag slung across her shoulder. For a moment, Eleanor stood still, her gaze moving across the village square as if reacquainting herself with its contours. Then her eyes found Clara, and her face transformed with a smile that bridged the 20 years between them in an instant. "Clara," she said, crossing the distance between them with unhurried steps. "You came." Clara rose from the bench, her own smile unfurling like a sail catching wind. "Of course I came," she replied, and then they were embracing the familiar shape of friendship, finding its form again, despite the years that had reshaped them both. They held each other for a long moment, neither rushing to separate. When they finally stepped back, Clara saw tears shimmering in Eleanor's eyes, matching the moisture she felt in her own. "You haven't changed at all," Eleanor said, though they both knew this wasn't entirely true. "Time leaves its mark on everyone, not always visibly, but inevitably." "Neither have you," Clara replied, offering the same gentle fiction, "not in the ways that matter." They gathered Eleanor's luggage and began the walk back up the headland path, moving at a pace that allowed for both conversation and comfortable silences. The afternoon light was golden now, casting long shadows across the landscape and illuminating the lighthouse in the distance, its white tower gleaming against the blue backdrop of sky and sea. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it is," Eleanor said, pausing to look back at the view that unfolded below them, the village nestled in its bay, the patchwork of fields beyond the endless horizon where sea met sky in a seamless join. "Or perhaps I never really saw it properly until I'd been away." Clara nodded, understanding this perspective that required distance. "It's always been beautiful," she said, "but beauty becomes more precious when you know it isn't guaranteed." They continued their ascent, exchanging small observations and memories that served as stepping stones across the river of years that had flowed between them. By the time they reached the cottage, a comfortable rhythm had been established, not quite the easy intimacy they had once shared, but a new harmony that acknowledged both their history and the separate journeys they had taken. The cottage welcomed Eleanor with the same quiet embrace it offered Clara each day. They moved through its rooms with a dance,